With another edition, or as they put it, evolution of Dungeons & Dragons on the horizon, I thought it would be a good time to talk about my top 10 editions of Dungeons & Dragons. For a little context, I've only been playing D&D tabletop since 2000, when 3rd edition dropped. Before that, I played some of the Gold Box games and the now classic Baldur's Gate. Since then, I've played a lot of games, mostly as a dungeon master, but it's always fun to throw around character ideas. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. Think you can guess where your favorite edition will fall on my list? Do you think you can guess what my number 1 will be? Throw your guesses in the comments. I'm curious to see how close your list is to mine. Originally published in 1974 in a wooden box as a series of small paper booklets, it was a strange merger of Dave Arneson's role-playing group and Gary Gygax's Chainmail Fantasy Rules. It moved players from fielding an army to play-acting individual characters that grow over time with successful adventures. I've never played this one, I just figured I'd be remiss for not having the original somewhere on this list. The basic box for 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons brought a bit more codification to the game. It could bring characters to level 3 and moved the game to a larger format. It also settled the combat into the D20 based system, rather than the D6 based rules from Chainmail. It's a cute box set for players to move into Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. 2nd edition AD&D brought with it clarification on the player side of things. The oft-joked about THAC0 replaced the clunkier attack matrices, and kits were added, or thematic subclasses that gave particular bonuses and limitations to the main classes. It was also during this edition that wacky but interesting settings like Planescape, Spelljammer, and Dark Sun came into being. If 2nd edition was a compositional upgrade from 1st edition, 3rd edition was a more grokkable one. You always wanted to roll high, and saves were compressed down to 3. Base attack bonus replaced THAC0, and every class needed the same number of experience points to level up. A new skill system based around the D20 and modifier replaced the older percentile system. Character attributes raised on a steady schedule, feats allowed for larger types of character customization, and a new kind of multi-classing was added with prestige classes for those that wanted narrow but different abilities. It's notable to me for scaling the numbers down with its bounded accuracy tenet. I like its loosening of the Vancian system into something akin to spell loadouts for many of the classes. Its proficiency system concept is cute, and it went back to many saves, but now each attribute is its own save. Demonstrating that even TSR could publish a game in a single volume, the Cyclopedia is mostly a collection of the 83 basic books of Basic, Expert, and Companions. Released in 1991, it's a crazy big tome for play, maybe not in size, but in scope. Quality of life upgrades are always useful, and with 5th edition purposefully limiting the number of books each year, a player-facing book was due eventually. I kind of hate this edition as Tasha's makes so many good improvements available, but I feel that most things, like being able to change cantrips, should have been included in a revised player's handbook instead. For the longest time, I ignored this edition, thinking that 2nd edition would have done everything better, but I feel like I was wrong. The appendices in the player's handbook alone are worth noting. Psionics, bards, planes, and planar travel, and, being the most important to an adventurer's survival, ways to divide treasure fairly. If I may include this edition's adventure modules, I'm a big fan of the mix of science fiction elements, as this feels like it was before the more codified split of the sci-fi fantasy culture. Maybe not as notable as many of the other editions on this list for most, but for me, this is the one I have a lot of odd nostalgia for. It's not something I got to play in my formative years, but I kind of adore the 2 box sets I have for this one. I quite like the casual tone of the writing, the black and white illustrations, and the broad amount of play 2 fairly small books provide. The first game of this edition was played sometime before 1974, dungeon mastered by Dave Arneson. And in his spirit I found enjoyment in throwing things on and off the table, though I had to grow into it. The most important thing to remember from this edition is that the rules are guidelines. and those guidelines are a good gauge for how far away you've traveled from the book. This edition is also the through line for the people in this hobby, whether or not you've actually played any Dungeons & Dragons. So, how were your guesses? Did I get anything wrong? Should another edition have made this list? Please tell me in the comments, and until I catch up with you again, stay warm.